Undertale. Have you heard of it? Of course you have, who am I kidding? Undertale is one of the titans of modern indie gaming. Its impact on the gaming industry and internet cannot be understated. From the writing, to the music, to the characters, everyone has already discussed how phenomenal this game is, and yeah, I really don't have anything new to add on that front. This game rules. I love Undertale. It's a masterpiece. We all know this already. Get new material, Fizzy. Well, we're not here to talk about how good Undertale is. We're here to talk about the fan content that spawned as a result, more specifically, the descent into madness that is the alternate universes. Alternate universes, often shortened to AUs, are a universal result of popular media. I have a whole video on the variety of alternate universe types, including a brief overview into Undertale AUs, but really, I could not simply end our discussion there. The world of Undertale AUs is so vast and fascinating that it deserves its own video. And I cannot think of a better time to make that video than the 10-year anniversary of this wild and legendary game. Today, with the help of a few wonderful friends, I am going to be going through the history of quite a few AUs and try to figure out the burning question that still haunts our very souls. Why the hell did this happen? So strap in, folks, as we dive into the deep abyss that is Undertale AUs. Let's start off with an easy one. Underswap is one of the two most well-known AUs for Undertale. It is what is known as a swap AU. A swap AU is when characters and personality traits of the cast are swapped around. It is one of the most common and universal types of AUs out there, so it's unsurprising that it was one of the first major AUs for the fandom. Now, due to the original creator of the AU disowning it and wishing to move away from the fandom, there's also a plethora of variants of this AU. It has essentially become a community collective AU. There are quite a few different versions of this AU, with the Mirahi's wiki for Undertale AUs listing a bunch of alternate takes. However, this video is mostly going to focus on the original, sometimes referred to as canon swap or classic swap by the fandom. As previously mentioned, this AU swapped the personality and roles of the cast, though it was not a complete personality swap, as certain traits remained the same. A factor of the swap that would later become a point of contention amongst fan and portrayals. Minor details were changed, however, such as the ketchup running joke being replaced with honey, or the spaghetti being replaced with tacos. The main swaps were as follows: Frisk and Kara, Toriel and Asgore, Undyne and Alphys, Metaton and Napstablook, Flowey and Temmie, and Azrael and Monster Kid. However, most infamously of all were the swaps of Sans and Papyrus. In fact, the first ever Underswap post was artwork of Swap Sans. So a quick disclaimer moving forward, we are going to be talking about Sans a lot, because Sans was such a popular character, overwhelmingly so, that he became a focal point of AU content. It definitely also helps that Sans is a very meta character and the AU stuff would later get more meta, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. In the case of Underswap, this version of Sans was adored by the fandom, to the point where he basically became a whole new character. He was often referred to as Blueberry Sans, but this fanon nickname was never agreed upon by the creator. Now, if you've seen my video on woobification and infantilization in fandom, you may remember me talking about the heavy infantilization that Papyrus experienced. So, imagine implementing Papyrus's cheery personality onto a much more popular character. Yeah, you can imagine how that went. Swap Sans, or Blueberry Sans, was heavily infantilized in the fandom. He was hyperactive, yes, but often depicted with the same almost childish naivete as Fan and Papyrus. A common detail in fan art was the prominence of star-shaped pupils, something that many people grew annoyed with. Though it is important to remember that the height of Undertale's fame also aligned with the height of popularity for Steven Universe. And not to stereotype Tumblr users, but I'm going to take a guess and say that the fans who drew Swap Sans with those eyes were probably just also Steven Universe fans. Swap Sans was also frequently shipped with the other Sanses. Now, I have read that the reason the creator abandoned this AU was because of Blueberry and this specific type of shipping. I haven't seen any sources for this, and I don't know if this was just a game of telephone heightened by fandom annoyance with Swap Sans' portrayal, but I figured it was worth mentioning because this is kind of what Underswap is now known for. Though Underswap is still wildly popular and one of the most important AUs in the history of the fandom, not just because it was one of the first major AUs, but because it would be a jumping off point for many more AUs to come. Swap Sans why is it so hard to say? Swapfell specifically would become one of the most prominent figures in the extended Undertale AU multiverse, cameoing in several AU projects. This is another easy one and one of the most well-known AUs in the fandom, Underfell. Underfell is also technically a swap AU, specifically a morality swap. In this AU, every character is evil and malicious with the exception of Flowey, who serves as a guide and assistant to Frisk. Like Underswap, there are a variety of different interpretations of this concept, though the first ever Underfell AU was created by Vic the Underfella. Initially, this AU was a very simple concept based solely around the character designs of the evil variants rather than having any kind of backstory. But this AU was so incredibly popular from the start and quickly evolved into a much bigger project with several versions, though eventually unique lore was added by the original creator. Examples of this include Asgore being the one to poison Kara, being responsible for Papyrus's scar, Papyrus actively being in the Royal Guard, and Alphys being genuinely invested in her unethical experiments. There are also unique fanon endings for this specific AU, those being the Trust Route, Closure Route, and Betrayal Route. In the Trust Route, Frisk and Flowey are able to befriend the monsters and destroy the barrier. The Closure Route is similar to the Trust Route, featuring the monsters realizing the wrongs they have done. And in the Betrayal Route, Flowey turns all the monsters against each other and Frisk is blamed for it. The AU focuses on a sharp, edgy look with primarily red, black, and yellow color schemes. While not a full-on horror AU, the designs and artwork for this AU does have some horror elements. An example of this would be the meat pies that Toriel bakes, and one of the first ever pieces of artwork made for the AU featuring Toriel really does look like a shot from a horror story. While early on there was some drama regarding accusations that this AU was already ruining the game due to the darker tone, which, I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. I think that mindset undermines why an AU like this would be popular. This AU, being one of the first ever AUs made for the game, helped introduce more darker what-ifs to the fandom and allowed people to play around with a more serious tone. Eventually, though, the main Underfell blog was deleted and the AU was officially dubbed community-owned, much like Underswap. Vic has explained since then that the blog was deleted due to the fandom backlash and anxiety. They have also explained that they didn't want to be known solely for Underfell. Though Vic is the creator of Underfell, they have been very accepting of other interpretations and alternate takes, and this AU is still very beloved to this day. Also, a lot of people thought Fell Sand specifically was really hot. So, these two are kinda confusing, but I will try my best to explain it. Swapfell and Fellswap are two very similar AUs of AUs. Essentially, these two combine the gimmicks of the previous two AUs, but in different ways. Swapfell is basically the Fell versions of the Swap variants, while Fellswap is the swapped versions of the Fell variants. Again, I understand completely if this is really confusing, but basically, Swapfell is the Swap AU, but evil, and Fellswap is the opposite. We good? Okay. Though there are several AUs with similar concepts, there are two main Swapfell and Fellswap AUs. Let's start off with Swapfell. The main Swapfell AU we know was made by a user going by Copegang, though much of the art made for it is gone now. It follows a very similar concept of Underfell, with every monster being evil now, but in this case the guide character is Temmie. Copegang's designs are the ones most commonly used by the fandom, featuring a primarily purple color palette as opposed to the iconic red and black of Underfell. However, there is also the adaptation of Swapfell that exists over on the unofficial Swapfell Tumblr. This blog features versions of this AU that have designs more resemblant of the classic Underfell designs with the iconic red and black color palette. Though the blog doesn't house just one specific interpretation of the idea, rather serving as a community hub of various other interpretations, reblogging various fan artists. I cannot fucking speak. The last time the blog posted was in 2021, which admittedly is kind of impressive and a sign of how important these AUs were in the fandom. This blog also features a link to the first ever Swapfell post made by a user known as Sandsouls, originally dubbing it Underfell Swap. Though, now I'm curious as to what this user meant by this post. Did they mean the evil versions of the swaps, which we now know as Swapfell? Or did they mean swapping the Fells, which we now know as Fellswap? We may never know. Though, speaking of Fellswap, let's talk about that now. The first ever Fellswap post was made by a user known as Whoa Look Arted Words, that post being a traditional sketch of Fellswap Papyrus. Now, as far as I can tell, this creator only made one post with this idea back in late October of 2015, so the idea is similarly community-owned like Swapfell. The most popular variant of this idea is known as Fellswap Gold, created by a user known as Blackgum. Now, Fellswap Gold is not a simple swap of the Fell variants. In Fellswap Gold, the underground is the way that it is because it's basically in a dictatorship. The monsters hid under the surface due to a human war, and opposing the themes of community and acceptance in the original game, the underground in Fellswap Gold is extremely oppressive. While Swapfell and Fellswap were never as developed and defined by one sole artist like the original Underswap and Underfell, they are still incredibly important AUs. It's a sign of the evolution of the growing AU scene, a scene that was only going to become more rapid and complex from here on out. Outertale was created by Mimi Pippin, and it has a very simple concept. It's Undertale, but it's set in space. The AU, much like Underfell, was originally just a design AU, based around a starry aesthetic. The AU didn't really have any notable story or character changes, the aesthetic was the main draw. And I can't deny, I understand why this AU became so beloved, because this aesthetic rules. I will admit it, I am a sucker for space-themed aesthetics and imagery. The primary color scheme of this AU is a deep blue with accents of shining starry gold, and pretty much every design made for this AU is absolutely iconic. So many details and gradients and constellation patterns. Characters such as Metaton and Asgore I especially want to highlight because they have incredibly detailed designs with little glimmering specks of gold and white in their designs. It's amazing. Though, of all the characters, I would probably say my favorite redesign is Grilby of all characters. I am genuinely transfixed by the gradient cosmic fire that is simultaneously orange and pink and blue. I need to eat this art. I cannot stress enough how gorgeous this AU was and how that was 100% the main appeal of it. But of course, that's not to imply that the pretty art was the only thing this AU had to offer. Far from it. There is also an entire OST of Outertale remixes made by a user known as Jeffrey Watkins, and as far as I can tell, yeah, it's the entire Undertale soundtrack that was remixed. And yeah, these remixes are really good. I listened to some of them while I was writing the script. The remixes are very dreamy and whimsical, perfectly aligning with the Outertale aesthetic. Some songs are definitely more orchestral compared to the original, but they all have a distinct synthy sound to them. But they all just sound so incredible. They carry the same energy of the original songs while still sounding unique and fitting the new setting. I want to say the remix of Bone Trouser is my favorite because it's my favorite Undertale song, but that Hopes and Dreams remix, honest to God, made me feel things. I really, really like these remixes. You know, if you couldn't tell. There is also an entirely separate remix OST made for an Outertale fan game, which I believe is complete as well. Even though this AU maintains similar themes, characters, and story beats to the original compared to other AUs, Outertale is still one of the most beloved AUs in the fandom. For good reason. It's really good. I really like it a lot. Go play the fan game too. Horrortale. It's similar to Underfell, every character is evil now. And they're all scary too. Though, while Underfell had some minor horror elements, this AU is one of pure terror. Who would have guessed with a title like Horrortale? This AU takes place after one of the neutral endings, the Queen Undine route specifically, which, I'll admit, is a really interesting idea. The fandom honestly did not tap into the potential of the neutral routes enough. Essentially, after Undine took over and banished Toriel, the underground fell into a state of chaos. The core has stopped working, they are running out of resources, and the underground is worse off than ever. There is also a fight between Undine and Sans, which resulted in Sans losing his eye, as Undine believed it was a source of power. Afterwards, Sans lied and told Snowden that there was a new rule to kill and eat any humans that fall into the underground, preventing Undine from harvesting their souls. Also, Sans goes out of his way to attack Alphys as means of getting revenge on Undine and personally lobotomizing her. Yeah, there's a lot of dark shit that happens in this AU. The main story of Horrortale takes place after the events of Undertale and follows a new human named Eliza, traveling through a decaying and starving underground. The story was mainly told through a comic, though a game demo also came out. However, since said demo was released in 2018 and due to some recent accusations against the creator, I kinda doubt we're getting a full game anytime soon. That's also kind of why I'm being a bit brief with this segment. The comic, however, still seems to be getting frequent updates as recently as June of this year. Now, the comic is quite long and also posted onto DeviantArt, so it's not exactly the easiest to read through. but as far as I know, the comic is very brutal and gory, including a scene of Eliza getting her arm ripped off. The art style of this comic definitely lends itself to the horror aspects. I'm not really good at explaining art techniques and aesthetics, but something about the scratchy shading and muted colors really creates an ominous atmosphere. Like, again, I don't know how to properly describe it, but the art just feels properly scary. The panels I have seen feel as if the elements of the character designs are given just enough detail to be properly unnerving without going overboard. And a lot of horror designs can easily go overboard. I'm looking at you, FNAF 4. Though unsurprisingly, most people who talk about this AU primarily focus on horror Sans. I mean, his design is definitely pretty iconic in the realm of the AU-verse. Speaking of Sans, though, I have grouped these two AUs together because they're sort of a duo in the fandom. Despite being created by different artists, many people in the fandom associate these two with each other. Inktale and Errortale... Inktale and Errortale? Errortale is so weird to say. Inktale and Errortale... Oh my god. Inktale and Errortale are AUs that also sort of parallel each other, and are both primarily focused around a variant of Sans, so I figured I might as well talk about them together. Firstly, Inktale. Inktale was created by a Tumblr user known as Kamyet, and is an AU that solely focuses on Sans. That is because this version of Sans, Ink Sans, is the sole survivor of an Undertale AU that was conceptualized but never completed. Ink Sans was able to destroy his own soul as a means of escape, and ended up in a blank white void. As a result of this, however, he is unable to feel emotions. He gains the power of a magic paintbrush, and uses vial of color and paint as a way to temporarily feel emotion. Said color comes from the creations made by the Undertale fan community. Ink Sans ends up becoming the guardian and protector of the Undertale fanworks and extended multiverse, so the paint keeps flowing and he is able to harness it. So, this character is incredibly meta in its design. I mean, to be fair, this concept isn't that out there. Artists really like to personify things, and what is Ink Sans but not the personification of the Undertale fandom creativity? But at the same time, Inktale feels so unique to the specific brand of meta chaos that Undertale created. Because Undertale was very renowned for how it gave gameplay mechanics like save points and resetting save files and narrative consequence, the implications of Sans remembering events from previous save files also was a huge reason he was so present in the meta fanon, you know, aside from just being a very popular character. As a result of this, Ink Sans became popular in the fandom as a mascot for how wonderfully chaotic this AU-verse was becoming. But of course, not all AUs are able to thrive. Sometimes an AU gets wiped from the history of the fandom for one reason or another. This is where Error Sans comes into play. Errortale, and by extension Error Sans, was created by user Lover of Piggies. She is also known as Crayon Queen more commonly, but sources seem to use both names interchangeably. Very confusing, thank you. As far as I can tell, though, Lover of Piggies is just a Tumblr exclusive name. She's primarily known as Crayon Queen on other social media. Anyway, Error Sans. Errortale is a sequel to another Crayon Queen AU, that being Afterfell. Afterfell? No, that's not what it's fucking called! Outertale is a sequel to another Crayon Queen AU, that being Aftertale. The simplest description of Aftertale I can give is that Sans, in an attempt to defeat Kara, injects himself with determination, giving him access to the save screen. However, upon being struck down by Kara, he ends up trapped in the save screen and eventually renames himself Gino. Where Outertale begins, Gino attempts to free himself from the save screen using that determination, but instead ends up in the Anti-Void and is corrupted into Error Sans. Error Sans is a destroyer of worlds who wishes to delete the anomalies of the Undertale multiverse. From here on out, the story is told through an Ask blog. Several key factors of the Ask blog plot include the following. There exists an Error Papyrus and Error Undine, though they never made their way into the story and, as far as I know, don't have designs. One post on the blog says that Error Papyrus has a design conceptualized, but I don't think it was ever shown off. Error Sans has a very antagonistic relationship with a variant of Frisk, known as Core Frisk, who we will get to later. And most importantly, Error Sans has kidnapped and corrupted Underswap Sans. This AU has a subplot of Underswap Papyrus working with Core Frisk to rescue Swap Sans. These two AUs are some of the most well-known throughout the entire fandom and even outside the fandom, and were a huge factor in how AUs from here on out would be written. But, I don't know, I feel like I'm forgetting someone. I feel like there's a third member of this Group? Oh, right. I almost forgot.
It's me. Hi, hello. You really thought you could talk about Sans AUs and I wouldn't show up to talk about my favorite one? Well, you're damn wrong! I'm gonna try and get through this quickly so I don't bore you or get kicked out of the recording. So, let's talk about my swagful fellow, Fresh Sans. God, that line was fucking terrible. Why did I write that? Fresh Sans was originally made by Crayon Queen in a live stream on January 2nd of 2016, and was originally made as a mashup of Undertale and Dippy Fresh, the version of Dipper made up in her reality bubble in Gravity Falls. It was originally conceived as a full AU, but eventually the other characters faded away and left only Sans. He was originally called Sansy Fresh before he got thrown around the Undertale AU community on Tumblr for a while. Fun fact, the first instance of a fully coloured Fresh Sans design on Crayon Queen's blog doesn't come from her, but from another user that goes by Private Mumbles. This was because Crayon's Error blog and Mumbles' Classic Sans blog had a crossover at one point, where Mumble Sans got, for the lack of a better term, freshified, with that being the original fully coloured Fresh design. As you might know if you're more active in the Undertale AU space, Fresh technically isn't a Sans. Instead, what we know as Fresh is actually a multi-dimensional parasite that infects any character and turns them into an 80s nightmare design. So that's fun. The parasite itself isn't very powerful in the physical sense. It's small and not very strong, so it relies on manipulation and the power of its host body. Now, we get into the juicy stuff, all the different roleplay events. At the time, certain big-ass blogs and such would host events where characters can show up. They're mostly for fun, but also can be used as a way to further a character's story. As far as I'm aware, Fresh participated in 2 of these events, officially played by Crayon anyways. But for now, I'm going to be focusing on the first one, Muffet's Love Ball. This was hosted by 2 characters, one of them obviously being Muffet, and the other being Underveil Sans, which is a character I won't go into too far. All you need to know is that this Sans forced a true reset in his timeline, being kicked out and protecting the multiverse as the dragon. Because he was also a dragon. Oh, and he also didn't have a soul. I'd love to tell you why any of it was like this, but most of his stuff has been deleted, so you can deal with what I can find. Sadly, I can't give exact details on what happened and can only give what we got from the summary from Crayon and other people who were involved. Brushing past all the goofy fun stuff of Fresh losing an Uno, or the fact that every entrance of Fresh is him trying to do something cool before crashing into any walls and objects nearby. Fresh apparently had an extremely emotional confrontation with Pacifrisk, another blog of Frisk in the Pacifist route, where he talked about his darker activities, with Frisk saying they were certain Fresh can be good. Before the change, that was really only noteworthy thing that happened. Now, if you're paying attention, you're going, what the hell do you mean, the change? And to that I say, the infection. While the pie is happening, Fresh brings another Sans to the back room before spitting up one of his parasites and infecting him. This began what was known as the Freshmageddon, really playing up with the Gravity Falls parallels. Crayon then made a post explaining the Fresh showed up to the ball to inspect the different AUs, and once he decided he had a relatively high chance of success, he possessed them all and used them to infect the multiverse, and then he just went for it. For the wider roleplay, it was either be Freshified or fight against the infective with the goal of stopping Fresh by either killing or removing all the parasites or convincing him to stop. Sadly, we don't have any logs of the whole roleplay, and the only thing we have is the in-character story from the Fresh Ask blog. As the infection was spreading, the only one that was not effective was Underveil Sans, the one I mentioned earlier due to his lack of a soul. Underveil then transformed into his dragon form and brought them all to his pocket dimension of the last corridor. Which he just can, because 2016 Sans OC, why not? After the obvious interaction of you shouldn't abuse your power to no, it's funny, Underveil eventually gets talking about Gaster and how he built the core to reach beyond the code because Underveil was also aware of the players. Again, 2016 Sans OC. Fresh being told about the players, these beings beyond the void who were more powerful than everyone at the ball combined, the ones that created the multiverse, had a bit of a crisis. He liked the idea that he was better than everyone else. Since he needs to possess people to live anyways, why not enjoy it? He wanted to enslave everything, and he can't do that. Beyond this, Fresh's story gets a bit too meta, fourth wall breaky for my tastes, but the arc he goes through you can probably guess. Unfeeling parasite learns empathy and begins to care about those around him. Sadly, many of these roleplayers and a lot of the accounts surrounding them have since been deleted, with the love ball being the best documented one. So to make sure I'm not feeding any misinformation, I'm going to put a pin in this and leave before Fizz realizes I've taken over and I get my ass beat. So, bye!
Dusttale, like many of these AUs, focuses on Sans. It follows a scenario where Kara uses Frisk as a vessel to repeatedly perform a genocide route and then reset, growing their power every single time. Sans, in an attempt to end this and properly kill the human after hundreds of resets, initiates a plan to kill everyone else in the underground before Kara can get to them, and grow his LV. That way he can actually kill the human. Now, technically, this version of Sans is also called Murder Sans, but it is much easier to call him just Dusttale Sans because there is also another AU featuring a murderer Sans called Killer Sans, and at that point, they're basically just synonyms of each other, so just to avoid confusion, let's just call the Sans Dusttale Sans. The main hub of this AU was an Ask blog called Ask Dusttale. There was also a series of stories relating to the AU on AO3, however, the original post made for this AU was fan art posted on a Korean site called DC Inside. Now, according to the Ask Dusttale blog, this AU has 3 authors who built the AU together in an Undertale forum called Undertale Gallery. It's pretty safe to say that this forum is hosted on DC Inside, but I can't exactly easily look into it any further for 2 reasons. One, the original posts were made in like 2016 and this forum seems to still be pretty active, so it was not easy to find older posts. And 2, the site is Korean, and I do not speak Korean, and I also do not trust auto-translators. That is to say, I have tried to gain info on this AU, but my sources are scarce, so bear with me. As opposed to other AU Sans that feature a completely new design, Dusttale Sans retains his original appearance, just covered in dust and with his hood up, though this design is definitely still iconic. One of the most notable aspects of this AU is the presence of a papyrus hallucination that follows Sans throughout the story of the AU. This imagery of the papyrus hallucination is probably one of the most well-known facets of the AU. Though the Ask blog is the main hub of this AU, there was also a fan game created by Evan Streblow. This fan game added more to the story of the AU, featuring 2 possible endings. The normal ending, featuring Kara defeating Sans despite his attempts. Sans is content at first, fully believing he can utilize this attempt in the next run. However, both his and Kara's memories have begun to fade, and the game ends with the complete destruction of their world. The Rebellion ending, featuring Frisk fighting back against Kara's control, merging their determination with Sans' soul, and successfully deleting Kara. Dusttale has also had a spike in popularity the past few years thanks to a Friday Night Funkin' mod based on it. I would say Dusttale became immensely popular because it tapped into the potential of a bad-ending Sans. Fans like the idea of Sans, the final pillar that stands in the way of your violent crusade, resorting to your same tactics as a last resort. That is a really interesting concept. AUs that flesh out characters' darker, more morally gray sides are very appealing for a reason, and Dusttale allowed for that possibility to be explored. Reapertale is an AU created by user Renrink, where the cast of the game are all now deities. Every character has been assigned a special title, each of the monsters being a god, while the humans get called acolytes and emissaries. Frisk is the emissary of mercy, while Kara is the acolyte of faith, and later the envoy of chaos. And I gotta admit, those titles are pretty sick. As for Metaton, he is an interesting case, due to him being in a robot body. The more fantastical AU recontextualizes him as a golem. If you don't know, a golem in Jewish folklore is an animated being usually built from materials like clay or mud. And of course, unsurprisingly, the most popular variant in this AU is Sans, who is recontextualized as the god of death. Well, okay, technically both Sans and Papyrus are gods of death, working together in different ways, with Papyrus being the one who comforts one on their way to the afterlife, but we all know that Sans is vastly the more popular one of the 2 brothers, especially back in the heyday of the fandom. This AU also happens to have a bit of a Soriel lean, with Toriel contrasting Sans as the goddess of life. Also, the creator is just straight up a Sorial shipper. Like, they said themselves in an old post that this AU started primarily as a Sorial thing. Though, to my surprise, this AU is still getting story updates as recently as a few days ago as I'm writing the script. Considering how many AUs are abandoned or disowned, I'm impressed. I also found a separate tag on Renrink's blog labeled Reverse Reapertale. Now, if I'm being entirely honest, there isn't really a simple explanation post that I could find as to, like, what this means, but I assume it's Reapertale, but the godly roles are reversed, based on the fan art I saw. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. I just figured I should add that info. Reapertale is a very cool AU. I like the designs a lot, and I really like the concept of it. Though, I will admit, I probably am just biased because I was a Greek mythology kid, so I really like any kind of story that features different pantheons of gods and deities. Speaking of deities, Dreamtale, created by Joku Blog, focused around two specific variants of Sands, those being Dream Sands and Nightmare Sands. Now this AU is very meta like many of the others, featuring Dream and Nightmare as representations of positive and negative feelings who traverse the Undertale multiverse. Dream wishes to protect it while Nightmare wishes to destroy it. This AU also has a lot of original lore. From my understanding, the original lore goes as follows. There are 3 trees at the center of the universe and extended multiverse that bring balance: the Tree of Life, the Tree of Magic, and the Tree of Feelings. Each one has a special guardian. The guardian of the Tree of Life is Quetzalcoatl. Also I'm very sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. The guardian of the Tree of Magic is Lanny, and the guardian of the Tree of Feelings is Nim. Nim is also the creator of Dream Sands and Nightmare Sands. However, they are technically not true Sands variants, as they were going to be given human forms, but after Nim relocated to the extended Undertale multiverse, they were given vessels based off of Swap Sands. You're following all this, right? So at some point, a human attacked Nim in the hopes of stealing the golden apples from the Tree of Feelings, and the two ended up killing each other. The human spirit was absorbed by the tree, and when Nightmare Sands ate one of the black apples of the tree, he was possessed by the human's vengeful spirit, turning Nightmare Sands into a corrupted guardian. Nightmare Sands is now a manifestation of negative emotions who seeks to bring despair upon the whole Undertale multiverse. This backstory is told through a comic presented as a storybook, though an animated continuation is in the works. There are also 4 possible endings for the story. From what I have read, one of these endings will be featured in the animated continuation, those being the bad, neutral, good, and true endings. In the bad ending, Nightmare Sands is able to kill Dream Sands and spread despair across the multiverse. The neutral ending features Dream Sands killing Nightmare Sands and burying a seed of one of the black apples with a seed of one of the gold apples, a process that allows for the Tree of Feelings to regrow, but it kills Dream Sands in the process and resets the timeline. Essentially, this ending is a time loop. The true ending features Dream Sands becoming a proper guardian after defeating Nightmare Sands. Now, the good ending, I couldn't find any information on, so I'm going to guess that that is the ending of the animated series because that makes sense in my brain. This AU is admittedly extremely disconnected from the rest of the Undertale AU verse in the sense of canon resemblance, but it is also extremely popular, so I figured I would mention it, especially considering characters such as Dream Sands would later become extremely important in the crossover content that is to come. Flowerfell is an AU of an AU, and one with a very complicated history. Flowerfell is an AU based on Underfell, with the main gimmick being that every time Frisk died and reset, a buttercup flower would grow on their body. The AU was primarily focused around the dynamic between Frisk and Sans, as Sans, like his canon self, is aware of the resets. This leads to this version of Sans eventually being redeemed due to Frisk's kindness. The AU had several stories associated with it, mainly now lost comics and AO3 works made by several people. I would say one of the most important pieces of media associated with the AU was actually made by someone completely unrelated to this crew, that being the fan song Secret Garden by Empath P. This song was so popular it basically breached containment. I still see the song used in animatics for a variety of different fandoms, and I will admit it is a really pretty song. But I'm gonna try and keep this section brief for reasons. The very important context of this AU is that it was a shipping AU. Not everyone associated with the AU seems to have been a Franz shipper, but the main people were, and this started a lot of discourse. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it is sort of what this AU is mostly known for nowadays. It also definitely doesn't help that a popular video essay on the AU ended up spreading a bunch of misinformation claiming the AU was never meant to be a Franz AU and that it was something forced onto the creators. This claim has been debunked since by one of those creators, by the way. Now, I will say, regardless of the drama and shipping discourse, I do understand why this AU became popular. The concept is cool and the imagery is very striking, plus, flower-themed body horror is really cool. There's a reason stuff like Hanahaki disease is such a popular fanfiction trope, and there was even the Possession AU where Flowey can possess other characters, so this fandom clearly had a thing for flower-based body horror, unsurprisingly to be honest. The AU also played into the meta storytelling potential of the resets, exploring the possible toll that the resets can take on Frisk. And to be absolutely clear, I am not a Franz shipper, so don't even try to twist my words. I can acknowledge Flowerfell for what it was, while having my own shipping opinions.
Hello, my name is Sky, and I'm here to talk about one AU that holds a place near and dear to my heart, Handplates. The story of Handplates started as a comic created by Zarla, posted on Tumblr in November of 2015 and cross-posted onto DeviantArt. Unlike the other AUs mentioned so far, which are either complete overhauls of the world Undertale takes place in, or overhauls of certain characters, this AU acts as an alternate continuity of base Undertale's story. Or, more specifically, this AU is used to explain a possible backstory of Sans and Papyrus. During Undertale's peak, and still to this day in all honesty, especially with the mysteries that Deltarunes brought along, there were many, many theories going around regarding the Skeleton Brothers' origins, and what I'd assume is the majority of these theories revolve around W.D. Gaster. I won't delve too much into explaining why people think Gaster is connected to the brothers, but the main connections people latch onto are the fact that his appearances resemble a skeleton similar to Sans and Papyrus's designs, as well as the fact that the blaster attack Sans uses during the Genocide Root boss fight is called a Gaster Blaster. There are other connections, of course, but that would be far too much lore to delve into right now, so if you know, you know. Handplates revolves around the specific theory that Sans and Papyrus were lab experiments, artificially created by Gaster while he was still the royal scientist. The story starts with Frisk discovering small metal plates that are screwed to the backs of Sans and Papyrus's hands, labeled WDG-1S and WDG-2P respectively. Their subject names. And it's here we get a glimpse at the creation, experimentation, and, well, torture of Sans and Papyrus that they cannot remember, as well as a first look at a certain skeletal doctor whose face is completely obscured by a very recognizable, glitchy, and smoky white aura. A strong introduction, I'd say, because, of course, who doesn't love some science experiment angst, which is exactly what this AU delivers. The comic details the brothers' quote-unquote childhoods while under the possession of Gaster, initially focusing on their lives while hidden away in his lab. They learn more about the nature of their existence, and slowly about the Doctor as well. The comic really goes into just how close Sans and Papyrus are as brothers, always looking out for each other, spending time together, and making sure the other is okay, especially when either of them is hurt from something Gaster might have done with them. It even delves into the fact that they both naturally end up seeing Gaster as a father figure of sorts, while he has no clue how to actually approach the fact that they could even feel that way about him. After all, he just sees the two of them as a science project, as objects with labels that he can do whatever he wants with. He doesn't feel bad about experimenting on test subjects, but living beings with emotions? That's where things get complicated. It's a really fascinating dynamic to explore. And, of course, all of it is chock full of some good angst. The story also delves deep into the magic and science side of things as well, going in detail through the brothers' physical, mental, and emotional development, as well as the way their magic presents itself. And, of course, this leads to previously mentioned unethical experiments that test said magic, as well as the explanation for the brothers' handplates in the first place. Whoa, like the title! I know my 12-year-old self was obsessed with the story and the whole concept behind it, So much so that it became the only Undertale fan comic that I actually continued to follow after my fixation on the game dwindled. It was also one of the few comics I followed that continued to actively update, only coming to an end in July of 2023. There's much more that goes on in the story than what I mentioned here, but I recommend checking out the comic for yourself if you're interested. It really is a great read. And that's about all I have to say for now. So back to Fizz with the rest of the video.
Endertale is a comic created by TC96 following a post-pacifist scenario where Frisk gives half of their soul to Asriel so he can come to the surface with everyone. Initially, this AU seems to be a purely fluffy slice-of-life fix-it, however the story eventually develops into a dissection of Frisk's trauma from the events of the resets, as a genocide run was completed before the events of this story, one that was caused by Kara. Now in the present, Kara is haunting Asriel and Frisk as a specter who wishes to gain back their power over the timelines and resets. This AU is quite notable for a few things. For one, the art style. It's really cute. I don't have much commentary to add, the art style is just cute. Secondly, this AU provides a scenario for the fans that was incredibly desired at the time, that being more slice-of-life post-pacifist stuff. I remember at the height of my Undertale middle school phase, where I spent hours watching those comic dub compilations, my absolute favorite ones were the post-pacifist found family ones, the fan stories that delved into the glimpses of a surface life that we see in the credits. This AU also has bonus points for giving a happy ending to Asriel and allowing him to join everyone else. Many fans were not happy with Asriel's ending in the narrative, considering every single other character in the game is allowed a happy life on the surface, except Asriel, who turns back into Flowey and isn't allowed to see his parents ever again. Now, I personally think this unfortunately makes sense since Asriel is, dead canonically, but hey, that's why fanon exists, and so, Endertale. Endertale simultaneously allowed for a happier ending for a very tortured character, while also expanding the story and developing Kara more. Now, I will say, I know there is a lot of discourse in the fandom regarding the early day portrayals of Kara. They were often perceived as the true villain of Undertale, which is admittedly very inaccurate, and several AUs we have discussed, like Dusttale and Reapertale, portray Kara more villainously, a fact I kinda glossed over. I will give Undertale this, based on what I have seen, the portrayal of Kara is at least more developed than the common evil ghost child who wants the entire world to burn. Undertale Kara is more motivated by envy towards Frisk and feelings of betrayal towards Asriel, and I do think this kind of portrayal works for Kara. Of course, I know this is a fan-made AU, it doesn't have to be completely reflective of the canon, but this is still definitely something I've noticed when it comes to Kara portrayals in the AU sphere. I guess especially because Kara is such a fascinatingly mysterious character, it is nice to see different interpretations of them. Now, Undertale has been on an indefinite hiatus for a while, with the creator claiming they'll eventually return to it, though on the topic of that, please don't harass TC or ask them when they'll work on the comic again. That has been a consistent issue for a while now in the fandom. Just putting it out there, let them breathe. No! Undertale Yellow is a fan game created by Master Sword Remix, released in 2023. It is a prequel focusing on the human who held the Yellow Soul, also the Justice Soul, named Clover in this game. It gained a massively positive reception, so much so that it gained a bit of a mini-fandom, much like many other AUs in the past. I guess it technically doesn't count as an AU in the traditional sense, but it is still worth bringing up in this discussion. The other human souls are admittedly an underutilized aspect of the Undertale fanon. The fact that we know little tidbits about their personalities based on the items associated with the souls, but their actual characters and designs are basically blank slates. You would think that would be the perfect opportunity for fan characters, but strangely, Undertale Yellow is kind of one of the only fan stories I know of that tackles that possibility. Though its popularity in recent years has inspired other fan games with the similar premise, like Undertale Red and Yellow, Undertale Green, Undertale Purple, you get the gist. Also, spoilers ahead for Undertale Yellow. In base Undertale, you find items that the other humans lost on their journeys through the underground. We know that the Yellow/Justice Soul left behind a cowboy hat and a gun. So, naturally, Clover is an adorable little cowpoke. Undertale Yellow capitalizes on this aesthetic in one of its several new areas, an old-fashioned western town in the arid Wild East. Other new areas include the Steamworks, the predecessor to the core, and the Mines, plus different paths of the Ruins, Snowdin, and New Home. You get to meet many new friends like Delve, a lonely hermit, Marlet, a friendly and cheerful royal guard, Starlo, the spunky sheriff of the Wild East, Saroba, a mysterious fox lady, and so many more. It also features 135 original songs, which are all very good, according to my friend Star, who has actually played Undertale Yellow, and I trust her opinion on this. You might notice that there's also a lot of new stuff, and you'd be right, because Undertale Yellow is about as long as the original game, if not longer. All of the crazy new content isn't the only thing that's great about this game. One thing that Undertale Yellow handles very well is its tiebacks to Undertale's lore. In order to stay in line with canon, Asgore has to take the yellow human soul. Which means from the very beginning, we know what Clover's fate has to be. While the Undertale Yellow team could have easily made it a complete AU and let Clover live, they stick to their guns, Undertale Yellow also brings in other key aspects of Undertale's story, like the True Lab and Flowey's whole, situation. Like the original game, Undertale Yellow has 3 endings: Pacifist, Neutral, and Genocide. Genocide technically isn't canon, but it is an incredible experience, with your typical insanely difficult fan game boss fights, of course. Neutral features a truly incredible final boss, which you'll just have to see with your own eyes. Pacifist is, well, tragic, of course, but it's all made with a lot of love, and is a genuinely impressive fan game. It's also completely free, too. Horrortale, also known as the core Frisk AU, was created by Doki Doki, and was central to the multiversal storytelling that was starting to become the standard of the extended fan and AU verse. The concept of core Frisk requires some context. For those who don't know, a common theory back in the day was that WD Gaster fell into the core, which caused him to split across the timelines. So, this AU follows a scenario where Frisk falls into the core, attempts to reset, and is scattered across the various timelines of Undertale, as well as the extended AU multiverse. This is after Sans threw them into the core to stop them from repeatedly resetting the timeline over and over to re-experience the pacifist timeline. Now an entity that exists between universes, Core Frisk is an omnipresent overseer of the multiverse. Unsurprisingly, this AU is very meta in its concept and essentially served as a crossover vehicle for a variety of different fandom AUs. As a result of this, many of the comics created by Doki Doki would feature Core Frisk interacting with other AU variants, for example, Reapertale from Reapertale. This AU was also important for the conceptualization of the Omega Timeline. The Omega Timeline is a special dimension that connects to all other AUs and essentially serves as a meeting place for different AU variants. The Omega Timeline ended up becoming a home for several other AU variants who no longer had homes, and a community worked together to build it into a safe haven. Core Frisk is basically the overseer and founder of the timeline, having the ability to bring variants to it. At this point in the fandom's life, the AUs had completely spiraled into their own entire thing, separate from the canon of the game. A new AU was no longer just a fun concept a fan artist cooked up, and now existed in the wider context of the AU multiverse crafted by so many different artists and writers. The Omega Timeline was a location that allowed for fans to further delve into this multiversal crossover storytelling in a more collaborative environment, including having an Omega Timeline Discord roleplay server. There is also the fan story known as Omega Timeline Poppy's Story. This blog was created by FMS Draws, a user who created a few other AUs, and focuses around an OC named Poppy who lives in the Omega Timeline. Poppy is a living drawing who was given life by Core Frisk. The blog also features other AU variants, such as characters from Paper Story, which is another AU created by FMS Draws, and Undercore. The Omega Timeline featured in this story is heavily based on the aforementioned Discord roleplay server, and really, I just like seeing all the different ways this community came together to craft this giant world collectively, because that's really what fandom is about. It's beautiful in a way. Xtale is an AU created by Gel Peñalosa, also known as Jacquet, primarily told through a comic and YouTube series. Now this AU is connected to the animated series Underverse and is a key factor of that whole thing, as they were made by the same creator, but we will talk about that in a second. First, we need to discuss the main thing that Xtale introduced to the wider AU verse, that being a new timeline and AU manipulation power known as Overwrite. This ability allows for a person to change a detail of the universe, ranging from objects to a character's behavior to completely destroying the timeline itself. As a result of this, there are technically several timelines for Xtale, 10 to be exact. The most important figure in this AU, excluding Sans and Kara, who we will get to, is Xtale Gaster, the creator of this AU world. You know, in-universe, I mean. This version of Gaster is the father of Xtale, Frisk, and Kara, and the one with the power of Overwrite. He initially wanted to create a perfect world solely for the sake of Frisk and Kara, but with each overwrite he becomes progressively more corrupt and abusive. He begins this spiral after he is introduced to the wider multiverse by a well-meaning Ink Sans. Eventually, Xtale Kara's soul is merged with Xtale Frisk, turning Xtale Frisk into a vessel and kickstarting the X event. And then, after several rewrites, overwrites, and resets, Xtale Sans is merged with Xtale Kara, turning him into the new X event. Every other Xtale variant is killed except for Xtale Gaster, who is able to escape the collapsing universe, though he shows no remorse for what he started. Now, there is a lot going on in Xtale, and you would think the story ends there, but no. Far from it. Now, this is the peak of the AU madness. I mean that in a good way, by the way. Underverse is undoubtedly impressive, like, factually so. It is a series dedicated to bringing all of these universes together, and not only is Season 1 feature-length, but it's fully animated too, and it has been going on for a while. I still cannot get over this. This is insane. The main person behind this project is JL Peñalosa, and you would think a project like this would require a shit ton of animators, but as far as I can tell, no. Only one person is drawing all of this. It's just a pure passion project. Truly wild. It features many figures of the extended multiverse that were already well established in the fandom. Most of the prominent members of the cast are from AUs we have previously mentioned in this video, such as Underswap, Inktale, Errortale, Dreamtale, Fresh Sans, Core Frisk, Outertale, and more. But you may be wondering, what exactly is the story of Underverse? Well, it is a continuation of the previous entry Xtale. After Xtale's universe was completely destroyed, Xtale Sans, now known as Cross, is one of the two survivors. He seeks to use the power of Overwrite to take the code from other universes. That way he can rebuild the Xtale universe alongside the help of Xtale Kara and Nightmare Sans. Ink Sans then enlists the help of other members of the extended Undertale AU verse in the hopes of stopping them. I truly love Underverse for what it represents. The MCU wishes they could cook something like this. As far as I know, the series is still in production, but unsurprisingly, this kind of work takes a long time. According to TV Tropes, the last update was in September of 2024, with Decade confirming she was going on a much-needed break, which is understandable. But honestly, even if Underverse was actually cancelled, I still think Decade deserves praise for making something so impressive. It is a perfect representation of what this fandom has managed to create, and that is why it deserves to be known as the peak of this madness. You know, in a good way, of course. I say madness lovingly. There are also a variety of much smaller AUs and Ask blogs with gimmicks such as PTA Sans, Flowerpot AU, or most infamously, the Christmas Party. There are far more AUs out there, more than you can ever imagine, including some that I have cut for time. Needless to say, there are a lot of AUs. So, with all that exposition out of the way, let's discuss the possible hows and whys of the Undertale multiverse. First off, the fandom was ginormous. In the heyday of late 2015 to 2016, you could not escape Undertale. It was a phenomenon. It was inescapable. It was the middle school hyperfixation for countless kids in 2016, including me. And larger fandoms tend to go off the rails faster. When you're in a fandom that is intensely active at the height of its popularity, the community energy is insane. A lot of people loved these characters, and still do to this day, and so the fans saw potential for more stories to tell. They wanted to tell more stories with this cast. And the popularity of the early AUs like the Swap and Fell AUs served as the blueprint that inspired people to keep making more and more AUs, eventually reaching some kind of level of AU madness never before seen. Every fandom has AUs, but I would argue Undertale had just enough content while still being such a perfectly sized game that it gave people a lot of wiggle room to imagine loose ends and what-ifs. Also, this is definitely not an Undertale exclusive thing, but I think the reason a lot of fan creations, like fanfiction stories and AUs, are the way that they are, is because of how intense a person's hyperfixation is. There are a lot of AUs that could realistically be reworked into being their own original story. Undertale has many of these, some of which we've discussed in this video. But instead, due to the hyperfixation, the creator would rather use the characters in that existing media. Because the love for these characters was truly that strong, AUs like Dreamtale could have been its own thing, but also, what if these characters were just Sans? What's really stopping us from making all of our OCs into Sans variants? It also makes sense to me why so many AUs were basically reworked like a game of telephone by several artists, or would feature cameos of other AU characters in their stories. In the fervor of a community with that size at the peak of its popularity, you really don't get a creative storm like that often. People didn't want these AUs to exist in a vacuum. Considering the meta-narrative that Undertale has, people wanted all these universes to be connected, not just to play around with meta-storytelling, but because these AUs were a sign of how connected and ginormous the community was. It was a massive group effort that many fans wanted to feel a part of. And while nowadays the MCU has kind of ruined the concept for most audiences, I can't deny that multiverses are really cool. There is a reason so many mainstream studios have tried to capture the potential of it, even if they failed horribly, because the idea of having a variant of a character where one vital element is different, or a strange what-if plays out, or having two characters switch places, that is a lot of fun to explore in a story. The possibilities are literally endless. And when you aren't confined by budget or mainstream expectations, you can get as creative and collaborative as you want, and a fandom environment is kind of perfect for that. Fandom does not have the creative, monetary, or executive limits that something like the MCU does. You can make the multiverse as big and chaotic as you want it to be. And, of course, we need to discuss Homestuck. Let me explain. It's pretty well known at this point that a lot of the early Undertale fandom consisted of Homestuck fans. Now this makes sense due to Toby Fox's musical contribution to the comic, and both Undertale and Homestuck played around with the fourth wall and meta storytelling, though Undertale was more subtle with its meta elements, mainly by defining gameplay features like save data resets and respawn points as important in-universe powers. Homestuck has no fourth wall. They break that bitch immediately and smash it into dust for the rest of the comic, not helped by the fact that alternate universes and split timelines are a massive part of Homestuck's story. What I'm trying to say is, I think Homestuck's influence on the Undertale fandom is part of why it became, like that. We can never escape Homestuck. You can almost say we can't fight it. But now, it's been a whole decade. A decade of creativity, discourse, drama, passion, friendship, and chaos. It's strange to think about. But it's also very important to note that the AU scene is still thriving today. There are still countless artists and writers who make AU Undertale content, and there are still many new AUs being created today. I was genuinely surprised as to how many of these AUs are still getting content for them today. The only things I can really compare this fandom to is the creepypasta fandom or the Friday Night Funkin' fandom. Fandoms where the fan content has become more important than the original text, where the fandom evolved at such a rapid, extreme pace and morphed into something new, and something undoubtedly special. Yes, it was weird and drama-filled and, for lack of a better word, cringe, but it was special. Because it was all a labor of love. It was a show of passion for a game that really did change so many lives. And you really can't manufacture something like that. Even though there was a lot of drama attached to several of the AUs I discussed, I don't like to let that define the whole community, because it really doesn't reflect how complex the reality was. Fandoms are naturally messy, and one of that scale was truly unable to be contained. Many of these creators still value and openly discuss their AUs, and many have left the fandom. Both of these paths are equally valid, but I still want to appreciate these works because, regardless of any fandom fighting, these AUs have had an immense impact on so many people. These stories were an earnest, self-indulgent, cringy love letter to the wonderful world that Toby Fox created. And I don't think that'll go away anytime soon. Happy 10 years of Undertale, and stay determined, everybody.
The door opened. I can finally leave. Martha, I'm coming home, sweetie. Oh,